Go, go, exclaimed Dante. We shall be absent at least a week, said the patron, and then we must run out of our course to come here and take you up again. Why, said Dante, if in 2 or 3 days you hail any fishing boat, desire them to come here to me. I will pay 25 piastres for my passage back to Leghorn. If you do not come across one, return for me. The patron shook his head. Listen, Captain Baldi, there's one way of settling this, said Jacopo. Do you go, and I will stay and take care of the wounded man. And give up your share of the venture, said Edmond, to remain with me. Yes, said Jacopo, and without any hesitation. You are a good fellow and kind-hearted, messmate, replied Edmond, and heaven will recompense you for your generous intentions. But I do not wish anyone to stay with me. A day or 2 of rest will set me up, and I hope I shall find among these rocks certain herbs most excellent for bruises. A peculiar smile passed over Dante's lips. He squeezed Jacopo's hand warmly, but nothing could shake his determination to remain, and remain alone. The smugglers left with Edmond what he had requested, and set sail, but not without turning about several times, and each time making signs of a cordial farewell, to which Edmond replied with his hand only, as if he could not move the rest of his body. Then, when they had disappeared, he said with a smile, "'Tis strange that it should be among such men that we find proofs of friendship and devotion." Then he dragged himself cautiously to the top of a rock, from which he had a full view of the sea, and thence he saw the tartan complete her preparations for sailing, weigh anchor, and, balancing herself as gracefully as a waterfowl ere it takes to the wing, set sail. At the end of an hour she was completely out of sight. At least it was impossible for the wounded man to see her any longer from the spot where he was. Then Dante rose, more agile and light than the kid among the myrtles and the shrubs of these wild rocks, took his gun in one hand, his pickaxe in the other, and hastened toward the rock on which the marks he had noted terminated. "And now," he exclaimed, remembering the tale of the Arabian fisherman which Faria had related to him, "now, open Sesame." And that's what you call the prestige, folks. Dante acting his way through this. How did he fake the blood? He just gets up agilely and starts prancing around with his gun and his pickaxe. And Dumas there doing a little mic drop moment at the end. If we remember back to the beginning of this chapter, or maybe it was chapter 22, when he's like trying to remember the phrase from Arabian Nights that opens the cave. Now Dante has remembered it and drops it. Open Sesame. Where does this set us up for the next chapter? We have Dante, the resources at his disposal, complete isolation, away from prying eyes, and armed with the knowledge of how to find this treasure. What could stand in his way now? I wonder if we're going to veer into like a Robinson Crusoe survival period of the story. I mean, there is a little ticking clock device of Dante telling them to come back in a couple days' time. So he has to figure this stuff out before they return, or before they send a fishing vessel for him. Well, let's take a step back for a second here and look at Dante as a character and where he's at in this story and his transformation. This is the first time. I mean, I guess you can kind of... Okay, I'm just going to talk out loud here. This is the first time I think Dante is actively deceiving people. I guess you can argue a little bit the taking the place of Abbe Faria's body to be thrown into the sea was a deception, but it wasn't one that required him to look someone in the face and tell a bald-faced lie to them in order to achieve what he wants. The deception here is a ruse. I mean, it's actually him making a choice and an indefensible action with another person. And what I mean by indefensible is, like, should he be confronted with what he's done if he's found out, there's no way he can say that, you know, oh, I was doing it in self-defense, or I was doing it to preserve my liberty. This is very much driven by... maybe not greed, but it's driven by something new that he hasn't had in his character up until this point. You know, he has his liberty. He has a good place on this ship, the La Jeune Amélie. He has good shipmates. He has a fair captain, Captain Baldi, who, weird that we've had 2 chapters with him now and just now get his name in the last last passage here. Is this going to be one of the first transgressive steps that Dante takes in his character that leads him down a path of ill? You know, up until now, it's really just been these dark thoughts of revenge and greed and vengeance, violence, etc. This is the first subtle step in the direction of I'm going to walk the walk beyond thinking the thought. So I think I want to earmark this for myself to kind of look back on in a few chapters, or, you know, once we get the halfway point of the book, like, is this an interesting moment where he transgresses? And please forgive me if I mentioned this in the passage when he was talking about the Arabian Nights and the genie's cave. I believe that was in chapter 22 when he was having a dream that all of the riches turned to stone once he was able to escape. But the interesting literary device here that Dumas is using, which we've talked about before, is using these kind of mythical and folkloric associations, these fantasy associations, to really amplify the adventure that Dante is on. It would be different, let's say, if, like, he was traveling to find a person, you know, a long lost brother, or, you know, someone he had to get information from. The fact that it's a treasure, it's concealed, and Dumas is using these terms, associating it with the Arabian Nights, with a genie, with open sesame, you know, that there's a magical phrase that can be said to gain access to something, brings in a kind of mystical element to this story, even though it's so set in the real world. It's a really fascinating way to deliver a story that it just has a little tinge of something else to it. I mean, you could go like the Andy Weir route and just be like, okay, and then he took the pickaxe and looked for the marking on the rock, and the rock was this kind of rock, and it came from, you know, this sort of magma at this age of the earth. No shade to Andy Weir at all. I don't know why I just did that. But you know what I mean? Like, he could be very literal and trying to ground this in a reality. And it doesn't seem like he's completely interested in that. He's using reality by, you know, doing his research on ships and the islands and the markings of a, you know, treasure, but then marrying that with these kind of fantasy elements, and it creates this kind of wonderful spectacle. All right, folks, this is going to be an extra long episode because I did promise you that I would look into some of the serialization information. I would do some research, and I did it on where Dumas often found his quote-unquote episode breaks, so like where he ended a serialization to make readers wait for the next one. And it's illuminating. The research I found was very illuminating. So let me just run down in kind of somewhat organized order here what I found. First, I discovered there were about 139 installments of this story over the course of August 1844 to January 1846, a year and a half. That equates to about 8 installments per month. I'm just going to say, because I'm going to go into it a little bit later, I'm doing 30 installments per month. So, you know, people paid for the magazine back in the day to read this. You know, I'm only asking for 3 cents per episode. You don't even have to pay for a full magazine. You get more. I mean, you get the same amount, but you get it more often. Anyway, I'll get into that later. Let's get back to the serialization. So about 8 of these a month, and each installment was about the length of either a half a chapter or a full chapter. As we've seen, there are some chapters here that are long. There are some chapters here that are short. And in those longer chapters, it does even feel like there are many cliffhangers within them. And that, I think, would be where those half chapters come in. Now, the chapter idea, I think, would have probably been more solidified once they compile it all into a book. Instead, I think in the serialization, I don't have confirmation on this. They probably would have been a little more liberal with how they are describing each passage, whenever you're picking up a new installment. So if you're doing half chapters, they're going to have some sort of like subheading rather than like what the chapter is called. Now, that was a revelation in and of itself to me, but I dug up more. Yes, that's right. This is the kind of work you get for only 3 cents per episode. You ready for this? Dumas had a kind of strategy when it came to how he was going to develop his stories, his installments, his cliffhangers. And it kind of breaks down like this. Each single installment of the serialization had to have one of 3 things. It had to have a physical danger. It had to have a revelation that was withheld until quote unquote next time. Or a new character or mystery was introduced mid-scene. So if we break that down a little bit, here's kind of how that plays out over the last couple chapters, right? So we've got the smuggling voyage. Once he's on the La Jeune Amélie, this establishes, a new set of characters, a new set of circumstances, some new dangers. The sighting of the island brings up a new location, builds expectation, excitement. The fake injury and the solitude of Dante is a kind of midway cliffhanger. That came not quite, a little past halfway through this chapter, but introduces a new situation. It isolates him. And then the open sesame mic drop moment at the end there is the clue, I guess, for the next installment's promise. Open sesame. The next chapter is probably going to be him discovering, maybe not discovering the treasure, but, the metaphorical discovering the treasure or something that has to build off of the idea of open sesame. And we've talked about this in those early chapters of how this would have impacted readers. And it's something that still exists today, obviously, but is becoming a little less relevant. Maybe it might be having a little bit of a comeback or a little bit resurgence as the streamers are losing their stranglehold on the methodology of releasing information and material. But like in the binge era, when Netflix releases an entire show all at once, you lose a little bit of that serialization thread until they release the next season, usually like 2 fucking years later, and then you're like, what happened in season 1? And then they make you have to go and watch the first season over again, and then you're wasting your time. You're spending so much time on one piece of thing rather than just following the story. Sorry, I got off on a tangent. What this looks like in reality, as far as like television is concerned, is more the HBO methodology, which is, if you watch Peacemaker or Task or The Pit or, any of these shows, The Gilded Age. Should I just list shows that are on HBO? My point being, they still do the week by week releasing of the episodes. And so we're following the story over a longer period of time. And it's a different experience because you have to wait for the next installment to get the information. It prompts questions not only in your own mind in processing the story, but encourages conversation amongst you and other people reading it or watching the show. So it's better cementing, I think, its reputation, its legend, its legacy in doing that. And if we can get real meta for a moment, can you imagine what this show, this podcast would be like if I had just recorded all of the Count of Monte Cristo and put it out into the world, with or without my commentary? We wouldn't have this back and forth and commenting on how things are reflecting in real time. Like, it would be a completely different experience. And honestly, a little more disposable, I think. It would just be an audiobook. It would just be something that exists out there rather than this dynamic thing that can shape and be molded over time, either intentionally or just through the nature of how you interact with it, how I respond to it, and everything in between. So that brings me, I think, to the end of chapter 23. I'm just looking over my notes to see if I've missed anything here. I'm really excited to see where this goes next. So why don't we just get started tomorrow with chapter 24? You know how we do here. We don't miss a day. But since it's the end of a chapter, I do have to mention the Patreon, which I've alluded to already in this episode. Patreon.com/gruntworkpod. That's GRUNTWORKPOD. Gruntwork Pod. That is the Gruntwork Podcast Network. That is the parent of the Countdown of Monte Cristo, along with a number of other shows. Your contributions go directly to helping this show, though, in order to stay on the air for the next 4 years, as is our mission statement. Keep the hosting going, keeping us ad-free, keeping us artist-owned. We have no sponsors except for you, and your contributions can be as little as $1 per month. What you get for that is story-only audio whenever a chapter is released. So as of today, you can go and get chapter 23 and all of the previous chapters in a nice, tidy little podcast feed that you receive when you become a patron. You can listen to all the chapters back to back to back to back to back, or as they are released. Also, since it's spooky season, I'm doing a little bonus episode or two here. I have already released The Telltale Heart. You can go find that over at Patreon. And I've made a wager with you all. If I can get at least 5 more reviews and ratings on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you can subscribe and comment, I will also do Premature Burial by Edgar Allan Poe as short little audiobooks that you can get over at patreon.com. But you can also help get the word of the show out to the masses by telling someone specifically about the show. Send them an episode, tell them the name of it, tell them the concept of it, grab their phone, search it, subscribe for them. I don't care how you do it. That's up to you. But if you tell someone about the show specifically, a one-to-one recommendation is much more likely to get them to actually listen. And I, of course, deeply, 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 deeply appreciate it. Even if you don't do any of those things, I'm just glad you're here listening day to day. And speaking day to day, we don't take a day off. Tomorrow, we jump right into chapter 24. So join me here then, won't you? I think this is maybe the longest episode I've done of this show so far. Okay. Well, we got a new standard. We got a new goal. All right. I'll see you here tomorrow for chapter 24. Until then, okay, goodbye. The Countdown of Monte Cristo is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. This show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Theme song by Magic Solo. If you want to support the show and others like it, visit patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.